Hi, welcome to the Gamesplainer. I'm Jeff the Gamesplainer and today I'm gamesplaining Plunderbund. Plunderbund is a 2 to 5 player game that came out last year, 2019. I feel like I'm calling this a slightly older game because it came out in 2019. That's only 6 months ago. I fear that I'm totally addicted to colder than you. But putting that aside, let's get into it. Plunderbund is in essence, it's a card drafting game. But throughout the entire game, you're only going to actually draft and bring into your hand a total of 6 cards. There's a really funky little element on this one where instead of just, I have the card, so I'm going to play the card and I get all the stuff that's on the card, you need to make a choice of if you're going to play the card. The cost of playing the card is a red, let's call them red cards. They just come into your deck. They come into that discard pile. When you shuffle the discard pile to become your draw pile, they will come back through. And each of those cards just gets deleted over to their deck. But what it means is if you're drawing 5 cards, you may only have 2 of those cards as actual cards that you can play. And that's really where this game comes into its own. I haven't come across another game that does that. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, I just haven't come across it. Not that I can remember anyway. This whole thing of, I'm pulling out 5 cards, but I can only use 1 or 2 of them. And you feel like, but everyone has the same problem. Or you can go the other way and not use the cards to use these cards. And you're probably going to struggle because you're not doing the stuff that you need to do. Every game that I've played so far has had people going, okay, that's fine, I'll just take the cards in. I've only got 1 or 2 cards. Okay, that's fine. But on the next hand, you'd have more cards. So sometimes you're not going to have many, sometimes you will have many. And it works out as a manipulation on how many cards you have. Rather than just being a negative, sometimes you may actually have the full amount. Now, there are 4 tracks, and this is really the important thing with the game. It's remembering that your position on those 4 tracks is going to say what you're able to score when we come to scoring parts of the game. And it's really important to get as high on those tracks as you possibly can. That quite often actually comes down to player order. For want of a better expression, because the first person to move up is going to hold the best position on that track until someone can move on to the 2nd level or 3rd level. It's not till further into the game that you're able to move a couple of spots at a time that starts spreading out, because some people will have a card, and this is where those 6 cards come in. Some people will have a card that will push that up, others will have a card that will push this one up. And that's a fine manipulation further into the game. Early on, in those early stages, you're kind of looking at going, everyone moved up the same distance on those tracks, but the first player is at the front of each of them, which suddenly means that the first player is going to be able to score every token that they wish, and everyone else not so much. What do I mean by scoring stuff? I'm glad you asked. So you're putting meeples up onto the board on different storefronts, and when you're on a storefront, every good that store produces gives you an opportunity. When we get to the end of the season, it gives you an opportunity to sell that good and to therefore get points. The problem is that if 2 meeples are up there from 2 different people, whoever is higher on the coloured track of the product will have the chance to sell that good, and the other one won't. So quite often there'll be spots where there are 2 players standing on there, but only one of them's actually going to score anything. There's that push-pull. The thing is that the number of tokens that are coming out gets more and more as the game progresses. So with only a few tokens out, what you'll find, there's only a few people on the board, or a few meeples on the board to actually take those points at the early stages of the game. So they tend to not be standing on the same spot as each other as a general rule. Sometimes they will be, but quite often they won't. If you watch my games play, you'll see that quite often they're just not standing right on the same spot, so it doesn't matter as much. I fear with this game that we can assume that the game is one thing when it's actually something really different. The game is realistically about how high you can be on those 4 tracks and then where your guys are standing to pick up the tokens that have come out of the bag. The tokens will come out of the bag every turn. The other thing is, back on those red cards, there's these little brown cubes that are goods, and they go into your storehouse. You have the option of spending goods instead of taking red cards, or spending goods to turn another card out of your deck. At the early stages of the game, that's not really a worthwhile thing to do. Later on in the game, however, that might be a really worthwhile thing to do, because what ends up happening is if you've spent your cubes throughout the turns, you don't have as many cubes to turn into goods, which will turn into points when we get up to that at the end of the turn. There's a real, how many do I think I'm going to get? Now, what I've noticed, I haven't actually done the math on it while I've been playing, but what I've noticed is that when I get to that point of selling stuff, I've usually had enough cubes to do it, and I haven't had to go, if only I'd kept those couple of cubes. But, especially in the last game I played, I didn't worry about taking the red cards into my hand, into my deck. I just pulled them in, pulled them in, pulled them in. On the very last season, that's when I started using cubes instead of the red cards to be able to just get them out of the hand, out of my way, so that every card I was able to pull was a usable card. The other thing is, when you get to the end of the game, if you've got red cards left in your deck, they're going to cost you points. So you actually don't want to have any of them left with you at the end of the game. But early in the game, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you're probably not going to have as many things to do on your next turn when you shuffle a whole lot up and go again. But it becomes a reality, and you kind of work through that. The other thing with this game is there's the cards that you're getting in the second, third, and fourth seasons. So you're getting 2 cards per season. Those cards have a synergy marker on them, and what that means is if you are playing the card from your original deck, which has the same name as the synergy, you can play this card and you don't have to pay for that card. So suddenly you can move up one of the tracks 2 spaces for nothing. There's a lot to that. You can kind of go, I want to move up that track, I want to push forward on that track. I'll take this card that will help me push forward on that track quicker and easier. Usually with those synergy ones, there's also another option where you can take a red card and push up on 2 tracks. So you'll push up 2 things on one track and 1 thing on another track. Once these cards start coming into play, that's when we really have that push-pull on, this person's just running away with that type of thing. There's a couple of things with the board that I really want to draw your attention to. The stores have next to them little markers of the 4 tracks, or one of the 4 tracks, or there's a couple of little spots that have the same symbol that refers to a track. Those markers, from someone who is totally fresh to the game and hasn't read these rules, or has read the rules and is just setting the game up to play, those markers catch you out. They mean nothing. They absolutely mean nothing. The only element that changes with the game because of those markers is how many tokens are in the bag for that particular track. So if you're running really high on one track and there's a spot that has a couple of extra markers and you have the ability to go, I think I'll go there because I think that stuff's going to come in the bag, that's a good one to go for, because there's a couple of extra markers on track that you're going to win that are in the bag because of that. So when you're setting up, don't stress about those markers. I know I did. I found an answer. That is the answer. They don't mean anything except for how many markers are going into that bag. Within the cards that you're taking, that you're drawing into your hand at the end of each season, there are 3 piles of cards that are always available to you. So if you don't want one of these other cards that comes out, there's always these 3 are available. I mean, there's only 4 copies of each of the cards or something to that effect. So there's a limit eventually, but at the moment there's all 3 available to you each time. I personally haven't ever bothered to use those cards. I just don't. I tend to find that doing other stuff pushes me forward. And I had someone at the table the other day who used those cards, and he was going, I'll take those cards. They generally help you get more guys onto the board rather than push up the tracks there's give and take on that. There's give and take on which one is the best one to go with. But my thinking is that there's no point in having extra guys on the board if you're not able to win off those tracks anyway. So you really do need to be at the top of the tracks before you start trying to get more guys onto the board. I don't know. I think there's a push-pull there that's... there's a nice little crunch. Now, I do have a negative on this game. The time it takes to play. I've played this as a 2-player game. I really enjoyed it. I played it as a 4-player game. Man, it took a long time. I fear that pulling the cards out, putting them down, and thinking about it before you do your thing is what slowed the game down. Now, in the rules it says everyone should put them down and be starting to think while other players are taking their turns. And that was happening with some people, but others were just not doing that. And geez, it dragged. It really dragged on. I fear, and that was with 4 players. This game plays up to 5 players. I fear that playing with the full 5-player count, unless you've got players who actually know what they're doing and want to move the game forward, it's going to take a really long time. So just bear that in mind if you're pulling this to the table, that if you've got 4 or 5 players, especially on first play out, it's going to take a long, long time. It does suggest half hour per player on the box. I feel like it probably took 3 hours with 4 players the other night. It's my one gripe on these games is that turn-based games tend to take longer, but it's actually not necessarily the game at fault. It's quite often the players at fault. If you're playing a game like this, you need to be doing the thinking while other people are taking their turn. So when it gets to your turn, you can go bang, 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 done, next. If you're able to play that way, I'm sure this one, the half hour per player, is probably accurate. But on that first play, not so much. Just be really aware of that when you're playing. Look, I think I'll leave that there. Please go ahead and watch my Gamesplay and Gamesplanation to get a feel for how the game plays and all the stuff that goes on with the game. If you have any games that you would like to be Gamesplained, please shoot me an email to thegamesplainer@gmail.com. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter @thegamesplainer to keep up to date with the games I'm playing. Subscribe to my videos to keep up to date with the games that I'm gamesplaining. And until next time, enjoy gaming.